Government shutdown. Day 10 or so, Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Okay, we're currently on day 10 or so of the government shutdown. Would you like to give our viewers a summary of the current government shutdown, and in this summary, like, who's to blame?
Oh, the government shutdown's pretty straightforward. The government has to vote to fund the government, the legislative branch. They just have to say, we're going to spend the money. They have this thing called a continuing resolution, which just means that they're going to say, we're going to spend money on the things we say we're going to spend money on. Usually they're supposed to have a budget and they all agree to the budget and then they vote on the budget and then that happens and that's how appropriations happens. But because we haven't been able to actually have a stable functioning budget for a while, what the Congress has done is they just keep doing these continuing resolutions where they just keep passing the buck to the next however many months. This last happened in, I think it was March, where there was this big debate of whether they're going to vote for the CR. And then Schumer said, yeah, we're going to vote for the CR. We're not going to shut the government down because that sucks when that happens. People suffer. So we're just going to vote to keep funding the government. They did that vote. And now we're at the vote for what that vote set the date to of when they were supposed to do that again. And they didn't do it, right? So the reason why they didn't do it is in the interim between then and now was that the pressures have changed. So we're getting closer to the midterms, which are about a year away. In the midterm elections, the Democrats are under serious pressure right now to show any tangibles. They're elected to Congress to do something. So far, they've been in the cone of silence, as it were, for legislation. So this is one of the least productive sessions of Congress ever. They've passed some of the fewest bills. They haven't even met that much. Part of that's just a function, I think, of Congress ceding so much of its power over to the executive branch to let them just do stuff, where the administration is rescinding money, they're moving money around, they're saying, oh, we're not going to fund stuff, we're going to fire a bunch of people. So Congress has just abrogated that authority of money over to the executive branch. But the reason why we're in this situation right now is they did the vote and enough Democratic senators said no, that government's not funded. Every few days, almost every day, they've been doing that vote again and again. And all the vote is right now is over the CR that was passed in the House. So in the House, they passed a bill that they keep calling it the clean CR or the clean bill. Essentially just says, we will pay for the things we already said we're going to pay for. And this is the thing that we pass that pays for those things. That's it. That's what it says. The Democratic senators saying, no, not going to do it. And the reason they're saying no, they're not going to do it is because of the Obamacare subsidies. There's this sort of cliff that's happening right now. And they've had ample warning, right? The alarm bells have been ringing all year. If you listen to the insurance commissioners who they give interviews and they write op-eds and they talk about it, they've all been saying, almost all of them, essentially that premiums are going to double for a lot of people on the Obamacare subsidies. The people who are paying for health insurance to the market exchanges, the money they're paying double, right? Double, 100%. And that's a lot of money. The way that Obamacare works, you need to have enough people participating in the market so that you have a risk pool that keeps the prices lower. So you have healthier people paying it. That was the whole reason they had that mandate initially that got thrown out, was that you have to have enough people that you keep the amount of money it costs to do anything down. If people get kicked out of Obamacare because these premiums, again, double, then not only are the prices going to go up for the people who are participating in the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, no, they're going to go way up for everybody who has health insurance in the country because the total risk pool of people who are participating in insurance goes down when people stop participating. If they don't play in the system that we have, then the system becomes more expensive for everybody who does have to participate. Now, just a little aside from me, this system sucks, right? There are better systems around the world. They're better for a variety of reasons. One is to have a public option that's completely removed from the private market, no middleman, just the government providing insurance that people can pay into. Because when you have private insurance, they take a cut, right, for themselves, for overhead, staff, for CEO yachts, you name it, right? They do it to get profit. And it sucks because that means that everything else is more expensive all along the board. Anyways, that's my own little personal rant there aside that universal healthcare would be better, but we're not there. Where we are was Obamacare, which was meant to be like a not a solution, but it was meant to bridge the gap between fixing the healthcare system and what we have now. And it was meant to address what were then already high healthcare prices and insurance prices way back when Obamacare was passed. And this was their solution. And it was supposed to be a market based solution. And for the most part, it works so long as those subsidies stay in place because the subsidies are what allow the insurance companies to offer such lower premium rates. And look, what's annoying about this situation is that a lot of states they had the insurers actually provide two types of premium rates: premiums with the subsidies, premiums without the subsidies. So they knew way in advance this is going to be really expensive for everybody. The Democrats obviously have a job to do, and they see the writing on the wall. If they don't get something done, because they didn't get anything from the big, beautiful bill. They didn't have a seat at the table, right? They just, you vote for it or you don't. That's it. For a lot of the legislation right now in this congressional session, Democrats are not being invited to have anything. If the stars align and the Republicans are like, yeah, we'll work together on this stuff, like on this Epstein discharge petition, okay, Democrats can vote there. But for a lot of the stuff that's being passed, a lot of the actual legislation that's being done, Democrats aren't, they're not in it. This is it. This is their chance. And so the reason why you see the Democrats not caving and not giving up at all is that this is the moment. There is no other moment. This is the moment where they have actual leverage. And so the reason we're in this situation is that the Democrats see the opportunity, are seizing the opportunity, and are afforded the opportunity because our government is not like other governments. When the government shuts down in other countries, everybody gets fired. You have to all run for reelection. Government stops. Everybody, all across the board, they get kicked out. They all have to run for their jobs again. If they get voted out, good, right? They didn't do their job. If they get voted back in, okay. They have to actually prove they can do their job because at a most basic level, these people have a job to keep the government running. We got here because everybody failed. Everybody in every room, in every scenario, they failed to come to a compromise to make this go forward, right? Ultimately, the Republicans bear more of the blame because they control the House, they control the Senate, they control the executive, they have what might be called a majority on the Supreme Court.
And ostensibly, they're a pretty unified party as well at this point.
Sure, unified enough, right? Enough that
Yeah.
they at least act in tandem, and you don't have the shenanigans where they try to vote out the speaker with one vote and all that nonsense. Because that was earlier in this. Lest we forget, Kevin McCarthy, not Speaker of the House anymore. We now have Mike Johnson. And Mike Johnson, I understand what he's doing. He's trying to thread a very careful needle so that he doesn't get thrown out by his own people again, like Kevin McCarthy had to deal with. But the price of that, the trade off of that is paralysis. It's inaction. And look, I've been listening all week to the press conferences from both the Democrats and the Republicans. I've been listening to a lot of the interviews that Mike Johnson's giving. And I'll say this much, being the educated political science eye that I have, what with my college education and studying political science, is that Mike Johnson's being very disingenuous. He's lying. He's saying, oh, there's nothing to negotiate. I'm not going to swear, but that's a load of nonsense. Sure, there's stuff you can't take out of the CR, but there's plenty you can add to the CR. It's not a vacuum. It's not set in stone, right? Nothing is over until the ink is dry and there's the signature on it. Like everything is negotiable. Saying that you can't do anything, that you have to shut down Congress and not show up at all means that they're getting paid, but they're not doing their job. The optics are really bad. I'll say this much for the Republicans, because I've given this a lot of thought. If they want to show they're actually like doing something, anything, then Johnson should have had everybody show up and have just optics of side by side of the Democrats staying in Congress and the Republicans sitting in Congress and just talking nonstop, like working on something. It doesn't matter what. Because what they're saying is that, oh, we'll just deal with this health insurance stuff in December. That's too late. The market opens November 1st. People make decisions on what insurance they're going to get when the market's open. Yes, sometimes they decide later until the window closes for when they can get insurance premiums. But here's my question. Are the insurance premiums going to all of a sudden change for anybody who's like signed the dotted line with an insurer? Oh, I'm going to pay twice as much for insurance for the rates, and then the premiums or the subsidies came back in. So yeah, the insurers are just going to go back and erase that. Never happened. We're not going to make more money. No, if they can make the money and get away with it, they're going to make the money and get away with it, unless they're forced to by regulation or by law or legislation to turn back the clock. Right? That's the issue. Is that the clock is ticking. The market's open and time's running out. Anyways, I know that was a bit of a rant, but we're here because both sides can't come to an agreement. The Democrats want something, anything they need. Actually, it's not want, they need to prove that they're actually doing their job, or the worry is that they're all going to get voted out if they can't deliver anything.
It's not a rant if it's Mondays with Mike, which it is. But yeah, no, for example, my family's premiums are already going to go set to go up 65% in the next year. It's nutty. If I can surmise from your summary here, it sounds to me like, so Democrat, you have the House. The House is based on population, but it's a bicameral legislature, and the Senate was put there by the Founding Fathers because the small states wouldn't have joined otherwise. And usually it's more... I'm not saying it's exclusively one way or another, but usually it's more of a Republican argument these days of, oh, we need the Senate because we need to avoid tyranny of the majority. I don't know exactly what words are used to say that, but it's an argument such as this. But this is that very same, this is, how do you like a taste of your own medicine? Go ahead.
Sure. Let's put this in very simple terms. The Senate gives outsized power to smaller states. So the state of, I think it's Wyoming, they're one of the states has the least number of people.
It's Wyoming.
It's less than 1 million people, has the same number of senators than a state like California, which has 40 some odd million people or more. And they have the same number of senators precisely to keep the country together, because the lines were drawn when the territories were formed and the states were added to the union, and the grand bargain struck was essentially, look, you can feel that you're more equal partners and won't be forgotten by time and by the demands of everybody in the country, so long as you feel you get a chance at equal or more equal representation within the government. And the Senate's the way that you get there. It's not the House, because for some of these states they have one representative total. Vermont's a good example. Bernie Sanders was the representative of Vermont for the longest time, and then he became one of the 2 senators for Vermont. And so in some cases there's states that only have one representative, and the Senate is actually their greater chance at power, representation, at access to funding and money, and even just the attention. And that is the trade-off of the way the country's set up, is that these states that frankly have low populations, and some of those populations are smaller than most of the major cities in the country, have way more power than these bigger states do, if you were to think of it just in terms of raw amounts of people. Just in terms of tax revenue, California is a huge amount of tax revenue, and it definitely does not get the same consideration. You see these games that are played with California in terms of some of the stuff that's been going on there. Like, they're not given the same level of respect in some cases that some of these other states are. And that's part of the way that our government's set up and the way it goes.
Yeah, California, it's got the economy larger than almost every country in the world, and it does not get a proportionate amount of respect. Let's put it that way. So, and I'm going to search here for a concise way of saying it. The senatorial dampening effect is at work here. It's not a government by pure majority. It was designed as a government that slows down and functions more on a consensus basis, you might say. And given how little consensus we have had in this country since about 2010 and really since 2017, that's why. That's not all of why, but that's a big portion of why stuff doesn't get done.
Part of the reason we are in this situation, more than any other reason really, has to do with numbers. So, Senate seats are statewide positions, which means they cover all the people in a state compared to House seats. So, in the House, some of the pressures that we're facing in terms of healthcare, health insurance premiums, they differ because of socioeconomic reasons. So, some districts are wealthier than others, and the people who live there don't necessarily participate as much on the insurance exchanges, or they have some other form of healthcare that they get. But because Senate seats are statewide positions, and because Democratic senators tend to represent states with more people, aside from Texas is the one exception, but California, New York, Pennsylvania, there's a whole bunch of states that have a lot of,
Don't forget
because
Florida, but yeah, in general.
but when you talk about economies that are that big and with that many people, then suddenly you run into really big numbers of constituents and voters that are all clamoring for something to be done about this, and that will exact a political response if something isn't done. So the senators, in some respects, are trying to keep their seats, right? Because especially because they don't want to face a primary challenge. That's the biggest kind of challenge they'll face. It's usually not a challenge statewide. Like once you get in some of these blue states, once you actually get the nomination for Senate, you're gonna win. It's the primaries. That's where the big issue has occurs because not as many people show up in primaries, but the people who do show up to vote in primaries are those who are driven by something. So for the longest time, the people who are showing up for primaries, look, just an aside, this is why members of Congress were afraid of the NRA and afraid of the pro-life movement, is that if you have somebody who's a single issue voter who's driven to show up for all of the votes, all of the elections, then they'll show up in the primaries, which is usually just the base. It's a fraction of the voting of the people who vote. It's a fraction of those people who show up to the primaries, and they're enough. If someone's driven enough to swing an election, right? Once you lose the primary, I mean, you're probably not going to win, even unless you run independently. But that's a huge risk. The biggest issue driving the Democratic Party right now, there's a few, but probably the biggest is going to be this healthcare issue because Obamacare was a Democratic driven piece of legislation. When it was passed, a lot of the Democratic stakeholders and constituencies were told, look, you should all join on these exchanges. You should all participate. It's going to be to your benefit to participate in this thing that we just passed. You will save money. And people did save money. And so now they're in a situation where you've got a whole lot of the Democratic constituents. I'm not sure on the exact numbers, but it's a lot. It's enough to move the needle, as it were, that the senators can't ignore it. Because if they ignore it, then you're going to have a huge wave of senators getting voted out, period. And look, I think what made this shutdown happen compared to the last one that didn't happen is that these senators are very savvy. To keep your job in a position like that, you have to be, to get reelected again, you have to actually be pretty politically savvy. And they have internal numbers that they're constantly getting that we, the public, do not see. And my guess is that their phone calls, their emails, the letters, all those internal numbers are like resoundingly loud to such a degree that the Democrats, we cannot, in any circumstance, ignore this. It has to be fixed because if it's not fixed, then we're suddenly going to find ourselves cast adrift, right? No funding, no donors, no voters. And it's going to be really bad. And so the really bad situation, yes, the shutdown sucks, right? It's a little bit of pain now. But the really bad situation is if they all lose their seats and then we're just left with a Republican supermajority. Because if you think the situation's bad now, wait until the Republicans have 60 seats in the Senate and they can just steamroll, right? They'll just do whatever they want. And whatever they want could be any number of things. Get rid of Obamacare, remove all housing subsidies, right? Like it could be something really strange. That's a whole different conversation. But the point is, the situation seems bad now, But these Democratic senators, enough of them that actually care about getting reelected and aren't just like there for now and are leaving and retiring, like the ones who care, they see the writing on the wall. They know like they have to do something. This is it. It's a statewide position. The numbers
Yeah.
are just not even close. Like we're talking a difference of millions of voters for some of these senators. And when you're talking about millions of voters, then things that affect millions of people suddenly become way more important to them than they do to House representatives.
Yeah, and you and I have commiserated previously. I don't know if you recall this. It was like probably over a decade ago. It was at Billy McHale's. I remember what I said, and it was that Obama spent like over half of the political capital garnered in his '08 election on Obamacare, and it's not even, it's, you summarize it well as a bridge system. And I think at the time, I just was like, it's not even a very good system, but understood as a bridge system because you need. Here's the deal. As in one of our, like, the cost of care segments in a previous podcast, the lady who needed the care said, we do have a healthcare system in this country, but people don't have access to it. But they do if they go to the ER, in a way. And when somebody goes to the ER and they don't pay, we all get the bill. So it is something, it's like fire insurance, where it really does, where the current system, if we don't load everybody on, loading everybody on is the only way to have some semblance of comprehensive medical care for all, or for as many people as possible. For my family, like a 65% increase in premiums, for some it'll double. What's that? That's a big crisis, but people don't see it because they're so busy in their lives and because it's down the road. Oh, we have to deal with everything here now. The senators who are there, they have a job, and their job involves operating within the system as the rules are defined in order to work for the benefit of their constituents and all of the American people, many of whom will direly need it if they face a doubling of healthcare costs. The other points of this are what should be done to stop the government shutdown and who suffers.
The big one, probably the most likely one, is to find some compromise like every other shutdown. So what's going to happen at some point is the last shutdown ended because of air traffic controllers calling out sick. And we're already seeing that happen to a degree. I think it was 10% right now of air traffic controllers are calling out sick. And it's causing delays, right? If you can't staff enough, then it's going to take longer for planes to travel point A to point B to point C to point D all along the routes if all the traffic controllers like we're not going to work. So that's probably what's going to happen is if the pressure gets real in the real sense, especially for these politicians because they have to fly back and forth all the time for fundraising and all that. If they can't do that, or if it takes, they'll be like, oh no, this is actually affecting us directly. What do we do? For it to stop, they have to find some kind of compromise that the Democrats feel they've accomplished something. So it's called tangibles, right? They have to deliver something tangible to their constituents that says, look, we actually did our job. In this case, it's probably going to be the subsidies for Obamacare. They may have to give up the rescission stuff where they're asking that the Trump administration can't rescind like different appropriations. They may have to give that up as olive branch or whatever. Like here, we'll give some stuff up in return for these Obamacare subsidies being extended. I don't think the Democrats are going to get everything they want, but they have to get something. And if they don't get something, I think that right now they have they found a spine. Oh man. And they're actually going to stand firm until they get, because they can't have done this for nothing. That's the thing, right? That the Democratic senators in particular, going back to what I said about statewide positions, they have to show that they've done something there for their constituents because this is the least productive Congress. Not, I don't know if it's ever, but it's up there. And least productive means just that. They're not getting anything done. And when you get nothing done as government, all the stuff that they're supposed to be funding and fixing and addressing, they're just not. In fact, by firing a lot of people and by cutting loans and grants and funds, they're making everything worse. People who are already hired to address situations from the past, they were like, oh, this is a problem, we should hire somebody to fix it, like studying beetles or something on trees to stop huge beetle infestations or something. If all those people are fired, the beetle infestations don't stop, the diseases don't stop, all the problems don't stop. It's just that we have to figure out a way to address those problems when they come back or they become worse. And I don't know. You have Johnson, oh, we're just not going to do anything until the shutdown's over. We're not going to swear in the representative from Arizona. We're not going to do any work on any legislation. We're not going to even talk to each other. And it's just, they have a job.
Congress gets a snow day.
Yeah, but it's like they have a job. They can talk to each other. They're just not. And that's a choice. And the choice is a bad choice. The politics are terrible. If you want to see an interview, I'm surprised I'm saying this, but Marjorie Taylor Greene had a very good interview on CNN where she laid it out. If you're not actually delivering for your constituents, you're not doing a good job. I thought she laid it out pretty clearly of what the issue is, that the politics look really bad and the Republicans need to figure it out because they need to actually do their job. In terms of ways to address it, there are other ways that they can address it. The other way, so there's two ways. One is the substance, which is the Obamacare subsidies, actually addressing what the Democrats want, compromise, politics, that whole thing. Politics is the art of the possible. If it can be done, probably they can do it. And I think they're writing off a lot of options just for political reasons, for theater, when instead of taking it seriously, and that sucks. They should actually do their job and fix this. But then there's procedural ways that can be done to address this, and there's two of them. The first procedural way would be if the Senate formally votes to change the rules on cloture, where they would need 60 votes, same deal as here for the CR, and they would change the rules so all they would need is just a lower number of votes, right? If they make it 51 votes for cloture, all of a sudden, you don't need 60 senators. You just need 51 senators. Now, is that one likely to happen? No, not at all. The other one is what's referred to as the nuclear option, and that is a procedural option that only requires 51 votes, where they do a bunch of fancy parliamentary maneuvers and change the rules in a very, not silly way, but in a different way. And that option could happen. Now, will that option happen? Probably not. Why that option won't happen is because if you change the cloture rule to 51, then all the times Republicans in the past have used this 60 vote thing to stop things from happening, all of a sudden become in the realm of the possible. And they don't want that, right? Once you change rules in the Senate, you have to go through the same rigmarole of doing that again to change it back to anything else. And they don't want to do it because if they do it, then maybe they're not always in power, right? Maybe they get voted out in the midterms or in 2028 or 2032 or 2030, whatever. But at some point, due to the nature of politics in the US, that it's like that there's always a reaction to whoever's in power. And so usually in the midterms, a bunch of people get voted out and the majorities change, right? At some point, there's going to be a lot of headaches in the future if they change that rule. But could they? Yes, absolutely. And it's the easier of the options procedurally, right? Because it only requires 51 votes. They could have a tiebreaker with JD Vance if they needed to, if the votes are close enough. So they have the power to do it. They're just not. And so the question then becomes, why aren't they? And the answer to that is that for whatever reason, both sides think that they stand to gain politically in some way from this. So I think for the Republicans, we're seeing it happen now with the rifts, with all the layoffs that are happening. I think it was yesterday and today that the layoff notices were going out to all the different agencies. They're just keeping on with what the Doge stuff was doing. They're just firing people, just keep firing people. But it's easier to do in a shutdown because the manager of the budget office gets to set priorities and they have much more latitude, right? They have more discretion for firings. And that's the big one, is that during the shutdown, there's much more latitude for the executive branch to do certain things, and there's much more latitude for certain things to happen. And we're seeing that with the rifts. So I think that's part of the reason the Republicans might not be exercising all the tools in the toolkit, because they stand in some ways to gain politically from what's happening. At least I think they view it as a gain. I'm not so sure it is. I think that the Republicans are making a bad political calculation right now. The Democrats 100% are doing, I think, the only thing they can do to gain any kind of legislative anything this session. Because as we've seen and as they've made clear, they don't trust the Republicans to actually keep to their word, right? The Republicans are like, oh, we'll deal with this in December. No, right? They've said they'll deal with stuff before. No, they don't. They don't set stuff on the calendar. They don't talk to each other. They don't make any agreements. They don't allow Democrats into anything. And so the Democrats rightly are like, what actually can we do? What actual power do we have? This is it. This is the moment. And so that's why they're doing it. So in terms of what can be done, it's that stuff, right? They either make a compromise or it's the procedural stuff. There's also, it doesn't have to be a 51 majority for the changing of the cloture rule. They could change it to 55, 56, 54, any number other than a super majority of 60. Right. It's just the fact that they could change that rule to whatever number they need to get the votes that they need to move on. They're just not doing that for reasons. And the reasons are obviously always political. They're that they don't want to face the same problems in the future. Look, they could have a system where there's no shutdowns at all. They just vote for enough money for a year, 2 years, 4 years. They tried. Actually, at the start of the Trump administration, the Republicans tried. They wanted to lift the debt ceiling to an unlimited amount. Actually, I'm not sure if it was unlimited, but it was really high. They wanted to lift it to such a degree that like they couldn't, there was no way they could have spent all that money. And that would have just circumvented this problem because instead of voting every time to spend the money, they just have the money and they spend it. That's one of the gripes I have about the shutdown is that this is all theater. This is a choice they've made to set the situation up in the way that it is so that every few months they have to come and have this tense made for TV drama of, we're fighting, we're complaining with each other. It's like, they could just fix it. They have a huge amount of power to do plenty of stuff. They're just not. Trump can he can call a special session of Congress. He can tell Congress that they all have to show up and just do their job until they fix this. He actually has the power to issue a proclamation during a time of emergency. And I would argue that the government not working is a time of special circumstances of emergency where Trump could quite literally just issue a proclamation saying everybody has to show up and do their job. The question then becomes, why isn't he? And that answer is, I'm not sure why the reason is, right? That maybe the shutdown is convenient for the Republicans for an entirely different reason, which could be the Epstein files discharge petition issue, because that one is a political headache for everyone in the administration since it's just the saga that keeps on going, right? It won't leave the news cycle, right? It's the drip of constant news and so the problem there for the Trump administration is that once Congress actually has an actual session, Representative Grijalva gets sworn in. She's already stated she's the last signature needed for the discharge petition. And then what happens then is I think it's 7 days, and then an actual vote, a made-for-TV moment vote on the floor of the House happens where it's an up or down vote. Release the Epstein files, don't release the Epstein files. And it's unavoidable. At some point, they can't just have a shutdown for the next 3 years. But that would be incredibly bizarre.
We would lose out on all kinds of research. So it reminds me of that not real, but very funny Tylenol advertisement, which was Tylenol. Nice try. Release the Epstein files. It's like, government shutdown, nice try. Release the Epstein files. But, yeah, I remember Harry Truman's 1948 DNC speech. I was there, sonny. No, I wasn't. He talked about, it was very interesting to watch because the political speeches were different in those days. On the DNC floor, like even in front of the camera, people would just get up and walk around. And he went on in his Missouri accent a short time ago. But and he didn't get that much applause. But what he did get applause is, and Congress hasn't been doing its job. And that is why I'm calling them back into a special session. Reps with wild applause. So, if Trump did that, maybe people would applaud him. I think people would think that was a very good move and a very presidential move.
It's better than what we have now. What we have now sucks. Like,
It's
we're
real embarrassment.
we're
Yeah.
in a shutdown, and people are getting fired, and services aren't getting paid, and the people working aren't getting paid. It sucks, right? Did you hear that C-SPAN interview with Mike Johnson where a military mom called in and was like, I have two kids that need health insurance or they could die, and we're not getting paid. Fix this, do your job. And you go, I'm sorry for your situation. I can't do anything. Essentially, the argument is like, yeah, you can call Congress back into session and do your job. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
But what I was previously saying was that it's like these are already laws that they have passed. These are already outlays of spending which they have approved. And there's a CGP Grey video about it. It's like spending that they vote for, which then they have a further vote to authorize. And then it's such a Kafka-esque situation. Everybody pointing at each other. Everybody having the plausible deniability. It's essentially like a family writing on the calendar, we're going to have a family quarrel at this time. Maybe get the bad blood out. But that doesn't happen because the bad blood is there. Ah, we got bad blood. Ah. Okay. That was a Taylor Swift song.
Yeah, so the people who suffer the most are those who get laid off, obviously, during the shutdown when they lose their jobs, those who are forced to work without pay, and the fact that there's even a discussion that they might not get back pay for working is a little bizarre, or for the furloughed workers, because it's not as if these government workers chose not to work, right? They were forced not to work because of the government shutdown. So it's highly bizarre that these workers wouldn't get paid in a situation that's beyond their control. It just looks bad. But in terms of who suffers other than that during a government shutdown, it's anything where there's discretionary spending or money that isn't getting spent. It's any programs that has money run out and the programs no longer work. So things like rental assistance or housing, or things where there's supposed to be like a continued injection of money and it's not happening. If it's not happening, then it just stops, comes to a grinding halt. Some of the other stuff that really sucks during a government shutdown is the national parks don't really get maintained. The toilets don't really get cleaned. The trails don't get cleared. Trash. It's bad. But then the other thing, and the big one actually, is air travel, right? Because air traffic controllers are federal employees, and even if they're considered essential, they can still call out sick. Like, they're allowed to call out sick. And because they're not hiring new people, and because the shutdown effectively limits how many people they can bring in because they're not paying anybody, the incentives aren't necessarily there to keep these highly paid, very stressful jobs filled to capacity. And if you don't have those jobs filled, then air travel comes to not a halt, right? That there is still a way that planes communicate with each other and that air travel can continue, but it slows way down. And the ultimate issue there is what affects all of us, which is the economic impacts of a government shutdown are terrible, right? It's like billions of dollars every day just lost of productivity and money, and that affects the economy in terrible ways, right? If the economy suffers any loss of GDP or any reduction, the stock market goes down, but also in real terms, people lose their jobs that aren't in the federal government because companies, if they don't make enough money, can't afford to pay their employees. And if you can't afford to pay your employees, you got to fire people. And so that's where the sort of intangible impact is still going to be felt, is that every day that this shutdown goes on, every single day, it's going to affect tourism because of air travel. It's going to affect the economy as a whole because of just, if you're thinking just in like basic arithmetic terms, if the federal employees, the millions of federal employees, don't receive paychecks, then every single person affected in that orbit of economic activity isn't getting the money. So things like rent, things like spending money on lunch at a deli or a fast food joint or restaurant, whatever, things like entertainment, travel, spending money on, say these federal employees hire gardeners, or they hire babysitters, or they hire whatever. If they don't have the money to spend on the economic activity, then just that alone is a huge amount of money that's not flowing in the economy. And that's bad. And that's every day. But also that's every paycheck that's missed, right? The list just goes on and on of in terms of who suffers from a government shutdown. Anybody who wants to interact with the government that needs a service and it's slowed down. Anybody who needs services of any kind, Social Security, healthcare. The VA is a big one, right? Because they're all federal employees. It just goes for all the jobs that are furloughed that would be getting done that aren't getting done. But yeah, that ultimately who suffers is everybody. But in particular, it's the federal employees, and then it's everybody that would be affected by the actions of the federal employees economically is a big one. That to summarize it in that way.
Yeah, the economic pebble hitting the water, rippling outward, gets the whole pond. So everybody suffers, whether it's the deli but especially brand America. Very bad for brand America.
It makes the country look incompetent that it can't fund itself.
Yes.
The rest of the world looks at the US and goes, what is going on? Why can't you pay your bills and keep the lights on and, just do your job? It makes everybody involved look extremely incompetent, right? Because in a well-functioning system, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? We can't expect perfection, but at a minimum, we expect them to keep the lights on, right? To keep everything running, that if you flick a switch, that the lights turn on, that the electricity still goes, that they paid their bills.
Yeah, you would think somebody who had a money printing press could keep the lights on.
Sure, but probably the most unknown effect of the shutdown is how many companies or countries or entities of any kind decide maybe we don't invest in the United States or cooperate with the United States for something because we can't trust that they can do their jobs, that they're just not able to actually do the thing. And if they can't do the thing, then we have to look for some competent leadership or government somewhere else in the world to actually work with and accomplish things, because the United States seems to be hopeless, right? At actually competently running a government. Uh-oh, right? It doesn't matter how big your economy is. It doesn't matter how strong your military is. If at the end of the day, the soldiers aren't getting paid and the people are being told just work for free until we can figure this out, it's okay. At what point do all those people say, call in sick and just, I'm not going to do this anymore. I need to get paid so, I can live. I can pay for housing and medical care because the health insurance premiums just doubled. Oh, by the way. And the food's really expensive and fuel and cars and blah, blah, all the list of things that people have to spend money on. It's not a charity. None of these federal workers are volunteers. Yes, they volunteer to do certain jobs, but with the expectation that they will be paid for that job, right? There's no one who's voluntarily going, yes, I'm going to work a very stressful day as an air traffic controller with these dangerous, stressful conditions and just not get paid. You don't go through that whole process and get weeded out. You rise to the top of your class where there's a huge failure rate of the Air Traffic Control Academy. The best of the best expect to be paid because they're the best, right? They are the best. They expect to be paid as the best. If they're not getting paid, maybe they just feel really sick about it.
Yeah, they're sick. Sick of this BS.
Yeah, exactly. They're sick of the BS.
Yeah, big silliness. That's what my grandma said. She was like, when you hear BS, that means big silliness. Yeah. Mondays with Mike.